Senator Rosen for your questions.
Well, I thank you. That was a swift move between Senator Hassan, and thank you, Chair Peters, for recognizing me. And really, I want to thank you and Ranking Member Portman for holding this important hearing. As co-chair of the first ever Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, I pleased to have this hearing, and I want to welcome my friend Eric Fingerhut from the Jewish Federations of North America and thank him for being with us today. And as others have touched upon, I want to talk a little bit about the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, because over the past few years, particularly since this spring, we've seen a dangerous increase in anti-Semitism, including the deadliest attacks on the Jewish community in modern American history. Just 3 years ago, of course, we had the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and in May 2021 alone, the ADL recorded 251 anti-Semitic incidences, a 115% jump from the same period last year. And those are just what's reported. We know many things go unreported. So to protect synagogues, Jewish community centers, and other nonprofits against terrorist attacks and targeted violence, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, or NSGP, it makes FEMA grants available to eligible nonprofit organizations so they can for target hardening and other security enhancements. And so despite the alarming rise in anti-Semitism, NGSP fulfilled less than half of the applications that it received for grants this year, far outstripping the $180 million appropriated by Congress in fiscal year 2021. And so, Mr. Fingerhut, I just really want to thank you for speaking to the importance of doubling the NSGP funding from $180 million to $360 million in your opening statement. It's critical to meeting the growing needs of the program to keep all of our communities secure. And so now I just want to follow up on many of the discussions that we've had so far. Rural communities, suburban communities, they often historically experience resource gaps. They face challenges in accessing nonprofit security grants to protect themselves against anti-Semitic, domestic terrorist attacks and targeted violence. And so, Mr. Fingerhut, how do you think Congress can ensure that these communities receive the sufficient federal support, including our outreach efforts and technical assistance to better access this important program? Oops, we can't hear you.
My apologies. Thank you, Senator Rosen, and thank you particularly for citing the statistics regarding the percentage of the applications for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program that were able to be filled by the existing funding sources. It's under 50%. And I think we just have to be honest and say that it's not that institutions are not aware of the need to take extraordinary measures now to secure their facilities. Regretfully, I think all faith-based institutions and nonprofit institutions in our country are becoming aware of the threats that they face, and particularly, regrettably, I must say it's true of the Jewish community, which for 23 straight years has experienced the largest percentage of hate crimes, according to FBI statistics, of any religious based group. But it's now the knowledge and the skill and the ability to fulfill the technical requirements of the applications. And so I'll just again mention a couple of quick things that I've previously mentioned, and I'd be more than happy to follow up with the committee and with your office for details. First of all, it is time that as part of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, that we not only have a sufficient level of funding consistent over time, but that we also allocate sufficient resources to FEMA and to the state-based institutional partners who administer these grants to assist them in developing the expertise to working with the nonprofit communities. They haven't received the resources for them to be able to be in that position of expertise. And as I've also mentioned, and I really can't emphasize enough, I do believe that it's time, we do believe that it's time for the Congress to designate the nonprofit and the faith-based sectors as critical infrastructure to this country with respect to domestic violence, which would trigger the development of comprehensive strategic plans by Department of Homeland Security, by federal law enforcement, FBI, and others. Senator, you know better than anyone, as a former synagogue president yourself, how critical our faith-based institutions are to the delivery of communal services in our great country. This is the freest, safest country in the history of the Jewish people, but regrettably, as you said, in the last 20 years, we've experienced dramatic rises in violent extremism and actual attacks, and we need to fill in the gaps.
Thank you. I'd like, in the short time I have left, I'd like to talk about the links between domestic terrorism, anti-Semitism, and anti-AAPI hate. The recent rise in anti-Semitism, of course, closely correlated with the spread of domestic extremist ideologies, neo-Nazis, the organization of this base. It's driven by ideological trafficking and conspiracies against Jewish control of society. The QAnon movement is out there. And I welcome the administration's recent joint comprehensive threat assessment on domestic violent extremism, but I'm disappointed that the report did not account for the nexus between anti-Semitism and violent extremism. So this question to Mr. Goldenberg and Mr. Yang, can you describe the connection between domestic violent extremist ideologies and anti-Semitism, motivation, tactics, and recruitment? And Mr. Yang, of course, we have those same issues happening right now with anti-AAPI conspiracy theories and domestic extremism. So I know maybe I'll have to take them off the record because I see my time is expiring, but I will submit them to both of you. I really want to hear what you have to say. We need to be a no place for hate society, and we have to stand together in this fight. So I don't know who's after me, Mr. Chair, but I guess I'll take my answers off the record.
Senator Rosen,
That's
please.
great. Well, I
Please.
guess you can answer because we're waiting for another senator to come either online or in the room. So I guess Mr. Goldenberg and then Mr. Yang, please.
Okay. Yeah, there is an absolute common denominator between the violent extremists on the right and the violent extremists on the left. And that common denominator, unfortunately, for some of these groups is their apparent hatred of the Jewish people. We have seen online, we have studied some of the rhetoric and the chatter, and in many cases, they may not agree with each other theoretically, politically, or any other which way, but when it comes to their hatred of the Jewish people, they use the same anti-Semitic rhetoric, the books, the elders. I can mention a half a dozen different the protocols of Zion. They actually share this information with each other. So if they completely disagree, sometimes even violently with each other on many other issues, at the core, it's anti-Semitism that unfortunately does bring them together.
Thank you for that disturbing answer. And Mr. Yang, can you talk a little bit about the connection of these anti-AAPI conspiracy theories and domestic violence that we've seen, particularly on the rise during COVID?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. I think one common denominator that we haven't talked about, both with respect to anti-Semitism and anti-Asian American hate, is this climate of fear. This notion that we are living in fear, we have to blame someone for the fear. Here, it's with respect to COVID-19 as it applies to the Asian American community. And what we are seeing is misinformation about the origins of COVID-19, if you will, the fact that Asian Americans eat bats or that Asian Americans are unsanitary. And that is why COVID-19 is here in the United States. One of the first physical attacks against an Asian American down in Texas was by a person against a father with two very little kids. And at the same time, he was saying, you guys are the reason that COVID-19 is here. So what we need to do is make sure we don't sow those seeds of fear. And that's incumbent on all of us as leaders to use the right words. That's not going to do the trick alone, but to make sure that we are not part of the problem in creating that climate of fear, that somehow we have to fear Chinese people or fear the Asian countries. That's what we've seen also in the Jewish American community, as you know, is that fear is what drives some of the extremism that we've seen. So those are a distinct element that I would want to name right now.
Thank you. And Dr. Jones, I'm going to follow up for the record because I'm way over my time, but I really want to talk about the specific steps the administration that we can take to address this linkage between bigotry, anti-Semitism, anti-AAPI hate, other forms of systemic racism, and with violent extremism and especially white supremacy. So thank you for indulging me, Senator Peters. I appreciate it.